5, 4, 3, 2.
Good evening. This is Nathaniel Eskenazi reporting live from the URI newsroom. Tonight we're going to have several topics on some current economic crises going on, and we're going to take it off with Nick Colonese talking about immigration.
Hi, I'm Nicholas Colonese, and I will be reporting for URI News, and I have the latest for you on the immigration debate. A new study published found that legalizing all the illegal immigrants currently residing within our nation's borders would increase wages for all U.S. workers. There is new evidence that giving illegal immigrants already within our national borders the right to be U.S. citizens would have great benefits to our economy. There are currently 11 million illegal immigrants residing within our national borders. They are not considered a part of our population as of right now. The debate in Washington right now is whether they should be give these illegal immigrants who have already crossed the border the gift of citizenship, which would make them eligible to vote and pay taxes. Here's a map of illegal immigrants. The darker red states are the states with the most illegal immigrants, and the lighter red states are the states with the least amount of illegal immigrants. The study covers the economic benefits of comprehensive immigration reform. The study was conducted by Dr. Raul Hinojosa Ojeda. Dr. Ojeda is an associate professor in the UCLA Department of Chicana and Chicano Studies. In the study, Dr. Ojeda found that if the U.S. government were to give citizenship to these 11 million illegal immigrants, it would add a cumulative $1.5 trillion in added U.S. GDP over the next 10 years. Many people found this to be a striking figure that puts them in favor of a legalizing program. The study also found that legalizing illegal immigrants would stimulate the U.S. economy. Immigration reform would increase U.S. GDP by at least 0.84%. This would translate into at least $1.5 trillion cumulative increase in GDP over 10 years, which includes approximately $1.2 trillion in consumption and $256 billion in investment. The benefits of additional GDP growth would be spread broadly throughout the U.S. economy, but immigrant-heavy sectors such as textiles, electronic equipment, and construction would see particularly large increases. The study also found that a legalizing program would increase all workers' wages. The real wages of less skilled, newly legalized workers would increase by roughly $4,400 per year, while higher skilled workers would see their income increase roughly $6,200 per year. The wages of native-born high-skill and low-skill U.S. workers also increased modestly under comprehensive immigration reform because the wage floor rises for all workers. In part, the study concludes that legalizing the nation's unauthorized workers and putting new legal limits on immigration that rise and fall with the U.S. demand for labor would help lay the foundation for robust, just, and widespread economic growth. Thank you. Now back to Nathan.
Thank you, Nick. As I'd like to add to that, the immigration reform of 2013 states that 85% of undocumented Latinos have family in the United States. As you can see in the chart here, it says that 85% have any family member. 62% of these immigrants are U.S. born, which are translating over to being United States citizens. 13% have spouses in the United States, and 20% have other family members. Several of these immigrants are suggesting that they want to stay here so they can wave an American flag and have the same rights that us American citizens do have. Why do they want to be citizens? They think that the United States is the land of opportunity, especially for those living in America. There are reasons for migrating. There's obviously better jobs and opportunities here. 38% say they have a better life for their family and for their children. They're able to reunite with their family members, and they're able to escape the terrible political views and repression in the Latino lands. And now we have Nico Alviani reporting on the green energy in the United States.
Thanks, Nate. From the gasoline we use to fill up our cars to the electricity we use to power our homes, energy consumption plays an important role in our daily lives. The important role energy plays is reflected in its high price, but often the highest price involved is overlooked. Are the prices we pay with our environment and well-being fair compensation for the amount of energy that the world consumes as a whole? We need to decrease our consumption of fossil fuels and in return increase our reliance on renewable energy sources. Hydropower, solar, and wind power are all alternatives that do not emit any harmful byproducts when produced. However, opponents have suggested that the high prices of production are not cost efficient, especially with the discovery of domestic natural gas reserves. With regards to the production of energy by power plants, there is a way to compare the cost of producing electricity from each individual energy source. A levelized energy cost is the price at which electricity must be generated to break even over the project's lifetime. The costs included in this calculation are the costs of capital, the costs of fuel, the initial value cost, and the operational and maintenance costs. The prices determined will be in terms of cents per kilowatt hour, and a kilowatt hour is enough energy to power a medium-sized AC unit for 1 hour. Using estimates from 2018, we can see that the cheapest energy source available is natural gas at 6.5 cents per kilowatt hour, and the cheapest renewable energy source was wind at 8.5 cents per kilowatt hour. Natural gas and wind energy each have their relative positives and negatives, but we need to set our focus long term. The best course of action for our future is in renewable energies, especially as the pollution from natural gas will drive prices up as regulation comes along. We may suffer in the short term with higher prices, but in the long term, benefits for the environment and future generations, Nate, are just the investment we should be focused on. Thank you.
Thank you, Nico. And now we have Robert Agugliaro reporting on questions about Obama. Are Obama's more rigorous CAFE standards the ideal method for lowering emissions and MPGs? Robert?
2 years ago, Obama released a revised version of the Corporate Average Fuel Economy Standards, otherwise known as the CAFE standards. He made these in collaboration with the state of California, the United Auto Workers Union, and 13 manufacturers making up 90% of the United States auto industry. As part of the standards, compact cars are required to meet a 5% annual increase of average MPG, while trucks under 8,500 pounds are required to achieve a 3.5 improvement in miles per gallon for the first 5 years, followed by a 5% improvement in the next 4. Manufacturers were also given certain incentives to achieve these, such as creating partially and fully electric vehicles, which will be more heavily weighted in calculating the average. Volkswagen was one of the companies initially participating in the CAFE standards revisement. However, they weren't in agreement with the final proposal. They felt that they were not other technologies, such as their clean diesel technology in the Passat, was not considered fairly like the electric vehicles. And also, they released a press release saying that Volkswagen wanted to see the same flexibilities and alternative compliance paths which are given to the heaviest trucks to be available on the smallest, already fuel-efficient passenger cars. Kelley Blue Book also did their own research on these standards. They found that to increase the technology to get the new mileage, it would cost between $2,000 to $6,000, which is different from the $2,500 as proposed by the White House. The more tech they add to the cars, the more savings are decreased. The plan assumes that the prices of gas will rise to $5 a gallon in the next 5 years. However, their researchers suggest that they will fluctuate between $3.50 and $4 per gallon in the next 5 years. Being that Americans are known to prefer larger vehicles, it is unlikely that they would buy the smaller, more fuel-efficient cars unless there was an increase in the gas prices. About a week ago, Bob Lutz, the former vice chairman of GM, attended a meeting with the Society of Automotive Engineers. They asked him what he would do if he would be emperor of the auto industry. He said that it would be a lot, and one of the things he talked about was how the CAFE standards are going about it all wrong. Not only are they overcomplicated and unrealistic, he said that by reducing fuel consumption, by forcing automakers to sell smaller, more frugal vehicles, is like fighting the nation's obesity epidemic by forcing clothing manufacturers to sell only small sizes. For his proposed plan, he would increase gas prices by 25 cents a year in the next 10 years. This would put them up to the same level of the European standards, and the United States population would not notice the change due to fluctuations in gas prices. In 10 years, he suggests that the U.S. will turn to small fuel-efficient cars, and the government can spend more money on fixing the infrastructure, so they will be driving on nice roads with reconstructed bridges. However, this is not possible unless you are emperor, because emperors do not need to run for re-election, and it's political suicide to increase the tax on gas prices right now. He said one good thing that comes from the plan is that engineers are able to think out of the box because they're no longer trying to make the best car for the least price. Instead, they are able to test their limits and see what they can come up with. There's a lot of controversy that still remains over the effectiveness of the proposed standards. However, they will be reassessed in the 2019 midterm review. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Now we have Matthew Lasora and Matthew DeGroff discussing our insight on our debt and the needs for change. Matthew?
Thank you. Hi, my name is Matt DeGroff, and today I'll be giving a brief summary of our nation's debt and why it is being called a crisis by many Americans. How can a nation be in debt? A nation acquires debt when the government runs a budget deficit. Budget deficit is when a government spends more money than it generates through taxes. In order to balance this budget deficit, the government must borrow money in order to make up the difference. The U.S. Treasury Department handles our nation's borrowing of money. They borrow money in the form of loans, known as Treasury securities, which can be borrowed from institutions such as banks, retirement funds, foreign governments, and individuals. Most consider this investment in the government safe because the government has an obligation to pay them back. Additionally, there is incentive to invest because once you loan to the government, you earn interest, although this rate is very low. So how did this debt escalate so much? The U.S. government has always borrowed money. However, our national debt jumped from about $6 trillion in 2001 to over $16 trillion in 2012 due to a few various things. One, the Bush-era tax cuts. Second, the Afghanistan and Iraqi wars, and also bailouts and stimulus packages and spending programs. So what does this mean? Debt to GDP level is measured by comparing the size of public debt to the sum of everything purchased in the country in the last year, aka GDP. This determines a country's ability to pay back loans. Any ratio over 80% will turn away investors. Recent budget deficits have driven America's debt to GDP ratio from 36% in 2007 to almost 73% today. And if the same levels of spending and taxation seen in 2012 continue, national debt will increase to 200% by 2037. So why is this such an issue? Obviously, being $17 trillion in debt is not something that's favorable and needs to be addressed. Debt affects everything from jobs to economic growth to public investment, which all affect the health of our economy. So what do we do? In the past, the U.S. has lowered debt to GDP levels. They have done so not by cutting federal spending, but rather by increasing GDP through economic expansion. However, a look at U.S. tax policy structure could be very beneficial to our tax debt crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. That was our insight on our debt. Now we have Matthew DeGroff giving us the solution, implementing a value with an added tax. Matthew?
Hello, my name is Matthew LaSorsa, and I'm going to be elaborating on Matt's last point of our nation's debt crisis. One way we believe a solution to this debt crisis would be through the implementation of what's called a value-added tax. What is a value-added tax, we may ask? A value-added tax is a form of a consumption tax. Therefore, it means that this tax is implied on goods and services that we buy. A value-added tax is collected at every level of supply chain anytime value is added to a product by a producer, minusing their costs. For here, we have an example from the textile industry. Here, they say it's a production of cotton into a full-time shirt. In this example, a farmer grows cotton and sells it to a textile maker for $1. In this example, the farmer added $1 worth of value to the product. In our example here, there's a 10% tax rate. So therefore, the tax implied would be 10 cents paid by this farmer. The next step would be taken from cotton to fabric. When the final textile fabric is sold for $5, there's been an increase of $4 to the overall value. Therefore, that 10% tax would result in a 40-cent value-added tax to be paid for by the textile maker. The next step would be to go to the actual stitching and sewing. Here, the shirt is now sold for $10. Therefore, the value added would be $5 to the product. The 10% tax then adds 50 cents to the overall product. The final step would be to be delivered to a retailer. Once delivered to a retailer, the shirt is sold for $20. Since the value added between the last step was $10, the additional tax would be $1. This equates to a total value-added tax of $2. The value-added tax has predominantly been used around the world for a pretty long time. As of 2004, there were 134 countries around the world that used this tax. In the figure, we can see that any country shaded in a darker color currently implies a value-added tax. It is important to note that the OECD, an organization comprised of the 30 highest per capita income countries in the world, currently all 29 of those 30 countries use a value-added tax except for the United States. Reasons why we should use a value-added tax? Number one is it resists evasion. A value-added tax is much easier to be collected because each chain of business has to report on its sales. Therefore, it makes it harder for the tax to be evaded, such as a sales tax. Another prime reason why we should use a value-added tax is that it supports non-discretionary government outlays. Adding a value-added tax to our current tax policy can help fund programs such as Social Security, Medicare, and other forms of payments that we have to make. One more would be that it raises consumption taxation. And we'll go into why it would be important to raise consumption taxation. Tax and consumption imposes income tax imposes a higher tax burden on capital income. Therefore, it discourages income in our nation. Tax and consumption also it's also been proven around the world, as we said before, to be a successful measure. By looking at the figure, we can see that according to, in comparison to other OECD countries, the United States only makes about 8% of its total tax income on consumption taxes, whereas the OECD average is more around 18%. In this figure here, we compare a value-added tax to a sales tax. Many people think that a value-added tax is much like a sales tax, but it's different. Looking at the figure, we can see that the tax goes from producer, a tax is paid before it goes to the manufacturer, another value-added tax is paid to the distributor, and another paid before the retailer, and another paid before the final consumer, whereas with a sales tax, the tax is only paid by the final consumer. Summing up a value-added tax is a consumption tax collected at every level of the supply chain. It's used by over 134 nations worldwide, including all nations excluding the United States of the OECD. Touching on Matt's previous point, the value-added tax could be used to fund non-discretionary outlays such as Medicare and Social Security, which are predicted to increase with the new baby boomer population. Thank you very much. Back to Nate.
Thank you, Matthew. Our final segment of the night is by Elijah Estevez. He'll be discussing the austerity debate. Elijah?
Thank you, Nate.
We're having some technical difficulties in the media room.
Okay, sorry about that. Austerity, word of the year in 2010. Such a big phenomenon all around the world. Everyone and the Prime Minister has been talking about it. Austerity is big in Europe, and it's getting big here in the United States. We can look at austerity as a package. It's a deal, for example, how we all know how Greece is so bankrupt now and there's such big trouble. So what Europe is doing is they're telling them, okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to give you some money, we're going to lend you money, but you got to reform your economy. So what that's going to do is it's going to help Greece pay back the debts that they have. But the thing that Europe is demanding, as we all know, since austerity is such a big thing down there, is for them to start cutting government spending, which is where Europe should be doing they should be doing this for a while now, but they haven't. For example, we can look how a company, when they're not doing so well, what they do is they cut spending, they fire some people so they can recover and pay back their debts. So the main idea is that they should shrink a little more, and so they can pay back the debts and recover. But the fact that they want to increase taxes, it's just bad for the economy, since it's going to press it down and make it worse for cutting government in the economy. Also, raising taxes increases regulation and is awful for the economy. We can see in the United States how we have the issue now with the air travel. They say it's the only way to recover for the $637 million cuts recovered by Congress. And Obama proposed this sequester in the hope that he could bully the House into accepting his tax. So what's going to happen now, he wants the citizens to complain so they can force the House to pass regulations and reverse the budget cut. All right, so another big argument out there right now is about these two Harvard professors, and they released a paper that came out right after Greece went on crisis at the beginning of 2010. The paper was entitled Growth in Time of Debt. So they circulated this paper, which targeted tipping point for the government in debt. So they said that once debt exceeds 90% of gross domestic product, they claim that the economic growth drops sharply, the most influential economic analysis of recent years, which is wrong. They got proved wrong by a team of research students at the University of Massachusetts. They were couple of economists were questioning about this. They wanted the data to research it and look into it. So they got proved wrong. So as they look at the spreadsheets, first, they were missing some data. Second, they used some highly statistical procedures. And finally, they made an Excel coding error. They left some countries out. It was around 5. And you correct all of these, and you get no indication of which is causing, which is no sign of 90% threshold. All right, so what's the right thing we should do about this? The right thing we should do is to fix if they should have done massive shrinking on government spending and regulations. Government should be cutting spending no matter what impact it has on GDP, and also lowering taxes over time. This will make it possible for the economies to pay some of their debts. Whose fault is it that Greece is in all this debt? Well, it's basically the countries that lended money. They shouldn't, first of all, they shouldn't be lending money to a country without knowing that they will have the chance to pay them back, their debts. So we have all these countries and all these debts now, and Greece is like, in Europe, one of the main ones between others. But the main one is lowering taxes. Lowering taxes will contribute more since, it's higher taxes is going to be less spending. So lowering the taxes will definitely help the economy get better. Thank you.
Thank you, Elijah. This has been a special edition here at URI Nightly News. Have a good evening. Thank you.